When they're studying law and justice through the minor, people really come into their own because sometimes they didn't realise how fascinated they were in the world around them. They didn't understand what they were looking at and what they thought was wrong until they actually can see certain examples where it speaks and makes the world look different than what they thought. Or the other way, which is that they find that it speaks exactly to what they thought was wrong with the world, that they didn't really know the right words for that. My name's Juliette Rogers. I'm Associate Professor in Criminology and I teach in the Law and Justice minor. Studying law and justice through the minor, they explore different ways of thinking about law. Technically, the Law and Justice minor isn't a law course, it's not an undergraduate law degree. What the Law and Justice minor does is give you partly a philosophical approach to law, partly an understanding of law through different theories, partly an understanding of law and the way it speaks in terms of its jurisdictional aspects. Does law speak to me, for me, about me? Do I understand myself in the language of the law? Law and justice is a way of thinking about law as not simply law on the page, but law in its application. If we think about what is an area of justice, what isn't an area of justice, that would be the question. Where is there no application of law? In every area that we breathe, that we're allowed to breathe, that we're prohibited from breathing or eating or touching or walking upon, is an area of justice. Specifically, of course, the Law and Justice minor is focused on that question of justice in relation to Indigenous law and Indigenous justice. How do we think about a just society living on Indigenous land? How do we think about actually a relationship between white law and Indigenous law? That's a question of justice, and that's a question everywhere, all the time. It talks about who they are, what they can have, and what society should look like. If you think about it in those terms, it means that it's shaping a society. So we need to understand what are the values that underpin that shaping. We need to understand why those values are then elevated to law, such that people can and can't do things and might end up in prison if they do. So what sort of students want to study law and justice? Some people come because they've heard that it's a little bit philosophical, a little bit interesting, and it's going to actually expand their minds. But most people come because they want to have a bigger grounding in legal theory, legal understandings, or indeed what law is at all before they go and do the Juris Doctor. Sometimes they become far more excited about law than they ever thought they were. Sometimes they've established that actually their parents were right, they should do law. And sometimes they find that they're more philosophers, perhaps, than they are legal theorists. Or they might find that they're more interested in the application as it is on bodies than it is in a courtroom. So they might end up more in the criminological path. Why should they study the Law and Justice minor? In a sense, they should do it because they want to think better. Because they want to think about issues of justice and issues of law such that they intersect with their everyday lives, such that they intersect with the lives of people in locations that they may never know, such that they want to understand their role in justice practices and actually understand how they are positioned in relation to the law.